Okay, welcome everyone to this Socialist Action sponsored Zoom webinar on Free Palestine, from the river to the sea. Other themes we'll be discussing are Stop the Zionist Genocide and exposing the history of Israeli Zionist colonialism. We have 5 panelists with us today, and we'll be beginning with the renowned poet, author, Pulitzer Prize novelist, lifelong social activist, and co-national chair with Noam Chomsky and formerly Daniel Ellsberg of the Julian Assange Defense Committee. That would be Alice Walker. We're so proud to have Alice with us. Alice will be followed by Nora Barrows Friedman. She is the editor, co-host of the Electronic Intifada, also a lifelong social justice activist, the former co-producer of radio station KPFA's Flashpoints in Berkeley. Then we will have Joe Lombardo, who is the co-national coordinator of UNAC, the United National Anti-War Coalition. Joe is coming from us today from Wales, England, but he's a resident of the East Coast, Albany, New York, anti-war activist, lifelong social justice activist. Then we have Lamis Deek. She is the renowned Palestine-American human rights attorney, National Lawyers Guild Defense Project, Muslim Defense Project, past vice president of the New York chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, board member of CAIR New York, that's Council on Arab-Islamic Relations, member of the legal committee, and also a core member of New York's Palestine Al-Auda, the Right to Return Coalition, and formerly its co-chair and activist to the present. Then we will have me, Jeff Mackler. I'm the National Secretary of Socialist Action. I'm a young man at 83, an old friend back 62 years of Alice Walker. I'm a founder of the Julian Assange National Steering Committee at Julian Assange Defense. I'm the director of the Mobilization to Free Mumia Abu-Jamal, and I'm one of the founders of the United National Anti-War Coalition. So with those brief introductions, let's begin with Alice Walker. Alice, so glad that you could make it today. You have to unmute, Alice.
I was saying I'm really happy to be here with you, Jeff, especially, and with everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're perfect.
Oh, good. So should I just go into it?
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Well, I was thinking about a little boy that I saw recently on the news who had lost both of his parents in the recent murdering rampage of Israel. He lost both of his parents on his birthday. And I don't know about most of the people in the world, but occasionally there will be something that catches the heart in such a grip that you really think you might not outlive it yourself. And this was such a moment. I was thinking about all of us on the planet. If this happened to us, if we lost our parents in this way on our birthday, what would that feel like? And what would we be after that? I feel today really happy that I have been able to be with the Palestinian people for as long as I have. It has been a great gift to me to see people, like my people in the South of the United States, just stand, no matter what, just really, stand, try to transform society peacefully. When that fails, you use, as Nat Turner did, other means of resistance. So I really appreciate having this opportunity to be with these wonderful people who also are, standing still, still standing, still knowing, still believing, still trusting that somehow humanity will wake up. I mean, really wake up. It seems to be, the fear is that once you change the channel, humanity will go back to sleep. And this would be tragic, because this is one of what is happening in Palestine now. The brutal assault by Israel is I was going to say wonderful. It's not wonderful in that sense, but it's an incredible time to understand how limited our time on this planet could be if we continue to be led by people who are insane. I mean, it's a very tricky place that we are in. And if we don't do something, stand together as we are doing around the globe and keep that standing going, once the channels change, we must not change. We must stay attuned to what is happening to Palestinians, because it's not as if it's just happening to them. My response to what was happening to this child proves that we are one. We are totally one. I mean, I feel what it feels like, or what it would feel like to lose both my parents on my birthday. I mean, what would I do? And we're talking about thousands of children and thousands of parents. So I've been very grateful for my opportunities to visit Palestine twice and to be almost there by boat, except that we were forced to turn around in our boat. But I would not have been anywhere else than on the boat. I would not have been anywhere else but in Palestine, in Gaza, when I went to visit. And this is what I would like to share with people, that we have a responsibility, as human beings, as elders now. We have this responsibility to show up. And no matter how they change the channels, and no matter how they try to make us interested in whatever, we have to stay clear that there are certain areas now on the globe and in human development that we must never abandon. And if we abandon them, we can expect this terror that we're seeing now to just spread everywhere, including into our kitchens. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here with you all. And I admire you all so much, and thank you.
Thanks, Alice. I was remiss in not making a few introductory remarks. The horror that we're seeing in Palestine today is unprecedented in the modern era. In the last month, 12, and some people say 14,000 innocent Palestinian people, a majority women and children, have been slaughtered by the most intensive bombing in the modern era by the Israeli army, aided by 2 offshore aircraft carriers sent by the United States to make sure that no one in the Middle East comes to their aid. Half of the housing in Gaza, a strip on the Mediterranean that's 5 miles wide and 15 miles long, have been obliterated by the Israeli bombing. Literally every hospital has been destroyed. 58 mosques have been smashed. And the entire area, this world's largest concentration camp, has been denied food, electricity, water, and medical supplies for a month. The Israeli government, backed by the United States, has bombed into smithereens 2.3 million people with 1,000 and 2,000 pound bombs, the most among the most deadly in any nation's arsenal. 88 United Nations workers have been murdered. Scores of journalists, all justified in the name of the Zionist state's right to defend itself. We're watching what the world considers a genocide. The demonstrations for Palestine are unprecedented. I got a call this morning that 300,000 mobilized yet again in London, millions in the Middle East, 150, some say 300,000 last weekend in Washington, D.C., with demonstrations in literally every U.S. city. People are shouting, "Stop the genocide, ceasefire now, free, free Palestine, from the river to the sea." So with that massive mobilization of humanity saying no to the United States, refusing a ceasefire, informing its diplomats that the word ceasefire is to be absent from their discussions, United States officials pleading with Middle Eastern governments not to withdraw their ambassadors, as they are increasingly doing. We see a catastrophe unfolding, and at the same time, humanity's hearts, minds, and souls going out to the beleaguered Palestinian people who demand the right to exist, the right to freedom, the right to self-determination. So with that, let's go to Nora Bowers-Friedman. Nora is a host, editor of the electronic Intifada, a lifetime Palestinian solidarity activist, and former co-producer of KPFA's Flashpoints in Berkeley. Welcome, Nora.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And my gratitude to Alice for her lifetime of work that's impacted so many people around the world and in the struggle. And so it's always an honor to even be in the same realm online or in person with you, Alice. And Lamis, who is one of the strongest and most courageous lawyers and outspoken advocates for Palestinian liberation. Really, again, really grateful. And of course, Jeff and Joe. And it's what a time. I don't even know where to start. I woke up this morning, as I do every morning, checking to see if my friends and colleagues are alive in Gaza. Going through the news items, I always feel really uneasy when I go to sleep at night because I don't know what I'm going to wake up to the next morning. Seeing the attacks on not one, not two, not five, but 9 different hospitals in Gaza, including 2 pediatric hospitals and Al-Shifa Hospital, which is the largest hospital in the Gaza Strip. Hearing doctors who have been working nonstop to try and save the lives of, I think it's about 130 premature infants in the neonatal intensive care units around Gaza, 39 of whom have been at Al-Shifa. And knowing that with the power outage and with Israeli snipers surrounding Al-Shifa Hospital, doctors are having to aspirate, the ventilators by hand for these tiny, fragile little babies. A few of whom have already died. I don't know if more by the end of this webinar will also have died. I don't know what to do with this grief. For me, it's a visceral anger. I know that we all feel it. I know that we are all terrified and enraged I feel like, I mean, Alice, you're the poet. Like, I don't know if we have the vocabulary to describe what's happening. And especially knowing that it's not, I mean, they say humanitarian disaster. It's a humanitarian disaster, and we're gonna, send 10 trucks of aid, right? One of which is shrouds to bury the dead. And they're saying that this is a humanitarian crisis and we need humanitarian intervention, as though it was like the aftermath of an earthquake, right? Or a flood. This is 100% political. This is 100% engineered and designed and enacted by the Israeli government and the United States and the European Union and the UK and the Western governments that not just allow this to happen, but facilitate and underline and finance and provide political cover for. And I don't know. I'm like at a loss of words. I don't know, I mean, we are all screaming at the top of our lungs to our, pathetic Congress people, to our pathetic, leadership in the Biden administration, to people who know what's happening and are refusing to do anything about it. It is, I don't know. It takes my breath away how revolting and disgusting these people are that are letting this happen and that are letting Palestinian children be slaughtered with the kinds of weapons that human beings sitting in a boardroom design and then build and ship to the Israelis. These new, they're always testing weapons on Palestinians. Gaza in particular is the R&D laboratory for not just Israeli weaponry, but for Western, the Western arms trade. They test these weapons and then they sell them on the world market, marketed as battle tested, right? Or field proven. And we're seeing, I mean, doctors who are, I don't even understand like how they are working under such conditions, being sniped by Israeli snipers in Al-Shifa hospital, surrounded by tanks. They're still trying to treat their patients with no electricity and no antibiotics and hardly any bandages. People are having surgeries on the floor. And these doctors are talking about the effects of these weapons, that when they explode, there's like a fan of these like razor sharp like blades that like fan out, and they're meant to literally shred flesh. The fact that human beings have designed this weapon that is being used on Palestinian children and their fathers and their mothers and their grandparents who've survived 75 years of this ongoing Holocaust and are being forced to endure it yet again while the whole world is watching. I don't know how we come back from this. I don't know what the next stage will look like. And in my darkest moments, which are regular, I feel like I feel paralyzed, and then I remember my friends in Gaza and my friends in the West Bank who are surviving with dignity right now, and the doctors and the mothers and the fathers who are telling their stories with full dignity and bravery and the fighters who are fighting with dignity and bravery for the defense of their people, while the entire world dehumanizes them. That is the thing that pulls me out of the pit of despair. I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at. It's it feels very bleak, and we can't let ourselves become just we can't relent. I think we have to meet the dignity and the bravery of Palestinians where they are right now.
Thank you so much, Nora. You just broke my heart. We'll go to Joe Lombardo, who is the national coordinator of UNAC, United National Anti-War Coalition, the largest, broadest coalition fighting U.S. wars in the country. We're proud to have you, Joe. Thanks so much. Joe Lombardo.
Thank you, Jeff. I agree 100% with what Nora just said. I have a difficult time sleeping each night. When I go to bed, I think I can sleep, but I think of people in Gaza, and I think of children and families huddled together in the dark, and afraid that a bomb will land on their head, that they will not make it through the night. There's no way to live like that. As Jeff mentioned, I'm in the UK now. I live in upstate New York, but right now I'm in Wales, actually. And so the time is different for me. It's around 7:30 here. And I had the ability today to be at a demonstration, as I am every Saturday. And actually during the week, there's a demonstration here also. So I went into Cardiff, which is the capital of Wales, and I protested with thousands and thousands of other people. These demonstrations were happening all across the UK, and I think, as Jeff mentioned, the big one was in London. Jeff mentioned the figure 300,000. I've been getting texts and messages from people all day that have been in London, and they say it's the biggest thing they have ever seen. The number of 300,000 was the police estimate. And I remember from my days of organizing against the Vietnam War a long time ago, when we would do an independent count. We learned a scientific method of how to do a count of a crowd. And we would do a count and we'd come up with a number. And the police estimate was always half of what our count was. So I believe there was more than 500,000 people in London today, at the same time that there were demonstrations all throughout the rest of the UK and all throughout the rest of the world that took place. If you think of what 500,000 is, the population of the United States is about 6 times the size of the UK. So we're talking about a demonstration in one place in the United States that might be about 3 million people. That's huge. And what it reflects here and what it reflects around the world is a very changing consciousness about Palestine, Zionism, Israel, United States, Britain, what's going on in the world. When we talk, we must be very clear that what is happening in Gaza, and we must say it, not be afraid to say it, in Gaza are war crimes, and they are crimes against humanity. Why aren't Netanyahu and Biden being dragged in front of the world court for crimes against humanity and war crime? There's a genocide going on. But the interesting thing about this genocide It is unfolding on our TV screens right before our eyes. People are seeing this and they can't believe it. And they are outraged. And this is the reason that we are seeing these demonstrations. Not allowing civilians to leave a conflict area is a war crime under the Geneva Conventions. You have to allow them to leave, but they're not allowed to leave. They are kept there as the bombs fall on their head. Depriving civilians of electricity, water, and food, trying to starve them to death. That is what it is. Or war crimes, or crimes against humanity. Using of white phosphorus on civilian populations is a war crime. These are war crimes, not just conducted by the Zionist entity, but they are war crimes because they are using U.S. Planes and British planes and British shells and U.S. shells and U.S. bombs, that our governments are complicit in these war crimes and crimes against humanity. And that's why we need to continue to stay in the streets. I don't know what you hear in the United States in the last few days, because I've been here for a little while. I was actually in Rome at a big conference where I marched in a huge demonstration for Palestine in Rome. But in the UK, you do hear about the demonstrations that are going on in the UK, but you don't hear about the demonstrations other places. I don't know if the same thing is happening, but they said there were 3 million in Jakarta, Indonesia. There were millions in the streets of Yemen. All around the world, these demonstrations are happening. And I believe that the world has never witnessed a movement like this before, has never witnessed such large mobilizations of people all throughout the world. And this is putting pressure on these governments. It's putting pressure on on Israel. It's putting pressure on the United States. And they're not really sure what to do. Okay, Jeff, I see. Even among the Jewish people, the idea of Zionism is changing. You know, they tried to tell people that Zionism was the way to protect Jewish people after the Holocaust, but it never was. It was never the safety for Jewish people. And that is becoming clearer and clearer to people today. Zionism is not the route for safety, but it is the death of the people of Israel. It is the death of the Jewish population. It causes anti-Semitism. It is not the way to protect themselves. The Zionists took the philosophy that you have to be a majority in an area, and then just like they were oppressed as a minority, you can oppress the minority, and that's your safety. And rather than identifying with other oppressed people around the world, they identified with the oppressors. They identified with the white supremacist nations of Europe and the United States, the imperialist nations, the colonial nations all around the world. That's who their allies are. And these countries are losing their power. The world is changing. Western imperialism is being challenged. It's being challenged in Ukraine. Zionism and imperialism are being challenged in Palestine. And people are looking for new means to fight back. You know, I just heard a little bit about this conference that took place in Saudi Arabia of all the Arab countries. It's very interesting that countries like the president of Iran was in Saudi Arabia, that all the Arab countries were there. And there was talk about what to do, not so much towards Israel, but towards the United States, because they understand that the United States could stop this in a minute, But instead, the United States and Britain and other European countries jumped on the bandwagon as soon as this conflict started in Gaza and said, we are 100% behind Israel. Well, the people of the world, in Britain, 76% are for a ceasefire. The people of the world are behind the Gazans, behind the Palestinians. And that's what we need to do, is we need to stay in the streets, we need to mobilize, and we can make enough pressure to end this thing. We can end the war as we have in other attacks that have been on Gaza in the past, but to really end the oppression of the Palestinian people and all colonial people, we need to put an end to Zionism, imperialism, and put an end to capitalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe Lombardo, National Coordinator of UNAC, United National Anti-War Coalition. Next up is Lamis Deek, for you newcomers to our webinar. Renowned Palestinian-American human rights attorney, National Lawyers Guild, Muslim Defense Project, past vice president of the New York chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, board member of CAIR and the legal committee, and a central leader of the Al-Auda Right to Return Coalition in New York. Welcome, Lamis Deek.
Thank you, Jeff. So forgive me, but that's a really, really old bio of me, so I have to make some corrections. I am a member of the National Lawyers Guild. I don't serve with any of those committees anymore, and I've many years ago, I was an advisory board member to CAIR, but that was many moons ago. I am in private practice with the firm of Deek, Dictor, Adi. And yes, I do human rights work, but human rights work doesn't pay the bills. So I do complex litigation and compliance, domestic and international. So litigation here and elsewhere. And my primary organization is the Palestine Assembly for Liberation. What we're doing there, and for all of that, and always, Jeff, my deepest thanks to you for your lifetime of work. Alice, it's an honor among you. It says that I have an unstable connection. Can you hear me well? Yes? Okay.
Not too well,
Nora,
Lamis, but keep on going and we'll see how it works out.
Sure. I'll do my best. Let me get the next phone closer to it. Okay. Nora and Joe, your lifetime of work is deeply appreciated. So I am Palestinian from Hawara. Many of you know Hawara either from the Intifada, early 2000, which was one of the bloodiest Zionist torture points in the West Bank. And now you know it from the pogroms and the burning of my town several times to date, beginning in February. My town is also the only town that has been completely shut down since October 7th. But before that, on October 6th, my family was preparing to celebrate an engagement, which was canceled that morning, the day before October 7th, because my cousin was murdered in Hawara. I have lost track of the number of cousins who have been murdered in the West Bank since 2021 and even before, many of whom were too young for me to have met them since my last trip. The question is posed, I think, to all of the panelists, and I'm going to be far more practical. For me, Palestine is the end all and be all of my existence, physically, existentially, and genealogically. So I have proposals that I think that we should be working on, and I'll begin with the question. From the river to the sea, what does this mean? For us, it's very simple. It means the dismantlement of all institutions of Zionist supremacy and Zionist violence from the river to the sea. What does that look like? Justice and accountability for all crimes, past and present. And after justice and justice and accountability, then we can say equality via one person, one vote. Justice, accountability, equality is what from the river to the sea means. I won't go into the details that everybody can find about the horrors that are being imposed on the Palestinian people in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. I think people are forgetting that there are massacres happening as we speak, that there is brutal, medieval torture to death of Palestinians happening on live stream for the world to watch. It's become a TikTok trend amongst Zionists in Palestine, in colonized Palestine. And so what we're hearing in the refrain of, well, never again, didn't we say never again? Yes, we do mean never again. What we have seen is that never again has been over and over again for Palestinians since 1948, not just now. I've said it before and I repeat again, Gaza is not the first concentration camp in Palestine, and it is a textbook veritable concentration camp. We saw from the inception of the Zionist entity until the late 1950s, 22 concentration camps run by Zionists all over Palestine. In fact, the US government was involved in negotiations of releasing Palestinians who were held in those concentration camps. What we're seeing not only, and we expect, and historically, we, as in those who hold our political analysis, and Palestinians, what we expect will happen even after this round of brutal, truly unprecedented in modern history violence, we expect what will come will be far worse, except it will be quieter and it will likely be more hidden. But there is no returning from this point for anybody, not for Palestinians, not for Zionists, not for the US, and not for the region. And so if we are of this awareness that what we are up against and what is facing us moving forward, even from this moment, requires that we say never again, then we are also required to question how we got to the point where it's been only over and over again, and assess what we have been doing that has been either misplaced, to put it kindly, or outright detrimental and destructive to the Palestinian liberation struggle. And I think it's important that we underscore the importance and the critical role that discourse plays in the Palestinian liberation struggle and in ensuring that never again is in fact never again. And to do that, we have to assess all the factors and the forces that brought us here, especially since Oslo. What has happened since Oslo and the prioritization of the Palestinian Authority is the deflection of Palestinian liberation and revolutionary will into a failed, not just a failed, but detrimental and destructive framework that has adopted, and not only by the Palestinian Authority, has been adopted by people who pose as allies or think that they're operating as allies, largely with some well-intention. And that discourse has moved away, again, from liberation to quote-unquote state building, from liberation to peace, from liberation to focusing on this settlement and that settlement. And it has also caused the fragmentation of Palestinians. And this comes up even subconsciously amongst our staunchest allies. The fragmentation of the Palestinian political national body, right? Meaning the fragmentation of Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza, but also the fragmentation of Palestinian refugees, right? Let's keep in mind that the majority of Palestinians in Gaza are refugees from lands in the 48 territories from where Israelis are making these absurd, evil, monstrous videos mocking the genocide of the Palestinians in whose homes they are literally sitting as they do this, right? So the fragmentation of Palestinians inside of colonized Palestine from the Palestinian refugees, and then the ideological fragmentation of Palestinians from innocence to not innocence, from those who toe what is the US-Israeli two-state line, the Oslo line, versus those who toe the popular democratic will, being the will for revolution, right? The will for liberation, the will for the dismantlement of all institutions of Zionist supremacy and violence. This has been the direct impact of the Oslo Accords adopted by the not just allies in the movement in the West, but even today, I think it was you, Joe, who was talking about the summit in Saudi Arabia. Well, the discourse there focused on two-state. It is appalling. And it is not a coincidence that genocide Joe Biden, in the very same sentences where he promises to continue the ongoing nuclear lever bombing of Palestine, also calls for two states. That is the salvation of the Zionist colonization project. This is issue one that I ask people are more cognizant of moving forward. Issue number two is quite specifically this. Palestinians do not have an army. Palestinians do not have a Navy. We do not have a Marines. We don't have any regular defense forces whatsoever. What must enter into the discourse is what has been critical to saving the lives of Palestinians, which is the demand for Palestinians to be armed in order to resist their genocide. And this is not a genocide just now, and it is a textbook definition of genocide. We've all heard, as a Palestinian, I've heard this since almost my birth, inside Palestine and outside Palestine, explicit Zionist intention for our genocide. This has always been. It has been done more intimately with Palestinians, which is why we say, listen to the oppressed, listen to Palestinians. But in the past few years, the whole of Israeli society, along with the Zionist leadership, has been very explicit about their intentions for genocide, beginning many years ago, but most visibly so for everybody to access, I believe in 2009. There have been what the Israeli deputy defense minister has promised, the little show. I don't remember if it was 2012 or 2009. It's been stated time and again. Under law, these euphemisms of mowing the lawn are euphemisms for genocide. They're prosecutable. They're express intent, actually. They're actually considered as evidence, even as euphemisms. So there is genocide. There has been genocide. And what is needed is a mechanism to protect. UNRWA, UNICEF, the UN, most of the agencies have failed to actually articulate what is happening in Palestine, barely articulating it as war crimes. And for God's sake, their own employees have been murdered, and they haven't said that it was Israelis. We can't wait or count on the UN narrative to be our guide narrative. We have to go with what is happening on the ground, what we are witnessing with our own eyes, and what Palestinians have been saying to the movement for many years. And this requires a discursive mobilization for the arming of Palestinians, in the very least, with personal protective equipment to survive the escalating genocide. It's been incremental. It is escalating in Gaza, and it is escalating in the West Bank. We also appreciate the decades of people advocating before it came to the UN, before it was a UN ESCWA project, before it was in the Goldstone report and the HRW reports. The movement to call Israel an apartheid state was brilliant, but this is just half the sentence. This is just half the sentence. It is apartheid for genocide, which is why South African leadership has always said, this is something different. This is a little bit worse. It is apartheid for genocide. It is settler colonization for genocide. The historic, psychological, cultural, and physical erasure of Palestinians has been the express project of the Zionist entity since its inception, expressly so. You've all watched it time and again. This is, as Truman had said, the piecemeal, gradual genocide of Palestinians. And what we are doing on the legal level is bringing words and legal culture and doctrine to this new, modern, phased I would say, media savvy form of genocide to become something prosecutable. My next proposal is that, you know, we really focus on what is popular democratic will. This again brings us to resistance. Let's not forget that in 2007, I believe, or 2006, I forget which, that Palestinians inside Palestine voted for the resistance. The resistance is very clear that it seeks to liberate Palestinians, liberate Palestinian lands, and that it does not wish to have the Palestinian people subjugated. I think it's important that when we speak about Palestine, we speak about it in these terms. The third thing, well, I don't know if it's the third or the fifth thing at this point. The next thing I'd like to highlight is the need to implement. I know people are moved, but we are powerful. Part of the reason we say we told you so is not to say, oh, we've got a one-up, but we told you so because we know that each of us individually in our own sectors is capable of producing far beyond what we have produced once we have a clearer understanding and articulation of what our goals should be. We intend to implement what all UN agencies and governments have refused to implement, and that is to exact sanctions. And while we intend to file with the ICC, certainly we will not wait for the ICC to act, because it will not act in a timely way. As you could see from the case of Rwanda, most of the defendants have died and there hasn't been a single prosecution to date. What we intend to do is, throughout the world, in every jurisdiction which we can access, we intend to launch and implement through various means, including legal sanctions, whether they are civil or financial or arrest warrants, right? Or investigations into all forces and factors, meaning media, those who are genocide propagandists, whether they use euphemisms or otherwise, right? Government officials, those who have funded, aided, and abetted the genocide that is happening now and the genocide that has been happening in Palestine for decades. We also ask that people prioritize Palestinian right to return. Again, Palestinians in Gaza have a place to go, and it's not Egypt. It's to their original homes and lands inside Palestine. We call upon and we ask all of our allies to make clear that Palestinians in Gaza should be immediately allowed to return to their homes. See Resolution 194 and countless resolutions around Palestine and other refugees. No issue or conflict on the face of this earth has been resolved without first resolving the issue of refugees and their return. My final note will be to address what we are working on in the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation, which is Palestinian unification, participation in an electoral process to ensure that we are active parts and properly represented, because we do not have representation for Palestinians now, and to talk about what Palestinians need. What Palestinians need is not charity. Palestinians are a very wealthy people. Just our gas resources alone along the Gaza coastline amount to trillions and trillions of dollars. We don't need charity. We need liberation. We need restoration of our resources, and we need reparations and to return safely to our homes. Please excuse me if I am loud. I appreciate everybody's feelings and solidarity. I don't mean to speak for all Palestinians, but I can tell you, as a Palestinian, we do not know what we feel. We go days without crying and we just work. And then once a week, many of us just have extremely primal breakdowns. Our goal and our impetus now is not to be digestible, but rather to inform and ask, and respectfully and with my deepest respect, to demand for all of those people who are in the movement to please consider what we have all failed to do and to do better, so that we can truly make never again, indeed, never again. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Lamis. I must say, I agree with your politics and passion. Let me express my view and view of socialist action. We consider Zionist Israel to be an apartheid, colonial, racist settler state. We, from the beginning in our tradition, never recognized the legitimacy of the Zionist state. It was imposed by the victors in World War II on the Palestinian people. It started with the partition of Palestine. Israel didn't exist before 1948, where the Zionists, who were at that time among the most reactionary currents in the Jewish movement, the Zionists joined with British imperialism in the Balfour Declaration to set up a Zionist state where the interests of British imperialism would be presided over by Jews at the expense of the expulsion of the Palestinian people. And when the Palestinian people and the Arab nations opposed the formation of Israel, the Zionists organized a war that took not the original 52%, but 78% of all of Palestine. So by 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were driven from their land. 350 of their villages were destroyed, renamed, and the Palestinian people, 75% of those in Gaza today, are from the dispossessed 1948 Palestine or their relatives. So I don't recognize the legitimacy of the Zionist state in any shape, manner, and form. And I am thrilled, even if in ignorance, people carry banners that say Free Palestine from the river to the sea. What that means is there's no legitimacy to the Zionist state, period. It has to be dismantled from A to Z. And that will take a worldwide movement, which we are beginning to see today. These demonstrations for Palestinian freedom are unprecedented in history. They are an unprecedented solidarity with the oppressed people of the world in the same manner that the people of the world opposed British, French, Portuguese, and British imperialism. In the same manner that Americans 120 years ago, like Mark Twain, opposed King Leopold's slaughter of 12 million people in the Congo. He ended up with the rubber and ivory, but American corporations like J.P. Morgan Chase today, that is the Rockefellers and the Mellons, ended up with the mineral resources of the Congo, which they still own today. Zionism is nothing but another colony. It is the Zionists are the gendarme of the United States to rule the Middle East, to assassinate Iranians and any people on earth who resist. So that's the starting point. That's why the United States ambassadors and diplomats around the world are scurrying to the Arab nations, say, don't you dare organize and support a ceasefire. And most of these dictators are complicit with the Zionists, recognize the legitimacy of the Zionists, which they didn't for the first 50 years of Israel's existence, because the Arab masses knew that Israel was carved out of Palestinian lands. It was a genocidal movement from the beginning, and today it is. Almost every day, the New York Times and every one of the corporate media denounces the Palestinians for breaking out of their concentration camps on October 7th. They say they attacked innocent settlers and slaughtered babies and cut off their heads. Most of that is lies, but even if it's true that the victims broke out of their own concentration camps, God forbid, like the Jews who tried to escape the 50 Nazi concentration camps and was slaughtered to the tune of 6 million, I don't condemn them for fighting back. I don't condemn them for cutting the wires in their concentration camp. I don't condemn them for arming themselves, for blowing up Israeli military facilities, for attacking settlers. And half of the people under 18 are part of, drafted into the Zionist army, 350,000 of whom have been called. The government of Israel refuses to recognize the Palestinian statistics, 14,000 slaughtered. but they claim that 38 Israelis have lost their lives. And that is as they drop bombs and slaughter the Palestinian people. I side with the Palestinian masses and their resistance, and that resistance has inspired the entire world. That resistance has brought out 500,000 people in London and hundreds of thousands in every city in the United States. It's akin to the Black Lives Matter movement in a certain sense. People who said Black Lives Matter and the history of the United States is the history of racist slavery. That's what the Palestinians are saying today. So where do we go from here? We start with some simple demands: boycott, divestment, sanctions. Not a penny for Zionism. The United States government last week approved $14.3 billion to replenish the Zionist army, the racist Zionist army with weapons that they're using. They're using the largest weapons in the world, bunker busters that are designed to take out entire areas. They're the largest weapon ever used, except for the atomic bomb and nuclear weapons, and they're used in Palestine today. End all U.S. aid to Israel. For the right of return of the dispossessed Palestinians have been scattered to the four winds in all the neighboring countries. For the freedom of the 2.3 million people in Gaza who are being bombed to smithereens daily. For the freedom of all of Palestine. For the end of the apartheid colonial Zionist racist state of Israel. In that context, in the context of an uprising of the Middle Eastern oppressed who are demonstrating for Palestinian, the solution is eventually for a democratic and secular Palestine where all can live as equals in the framework of the abolition of the racist Zionist colonial state, for the right to return to their homelands, to have their land back, for a free democratic society, in my view, a socialist society where all share the wealth of the nation and are free, in the context of a democratic federation of the Middle East of societies that prioritize human needs, not capitalist profits. Roughly speaking, that's the position of UNAC. That's the position of my party's Socialist Action. That's the position of every Palestinian who have been told for decades that the solution is a, quote, two-state, and that is a ghettoized, isolated, segregated, persecuted, tiny sliver of Palestine, perhaps 5% or 10%, where Palestinians can live as slaves. The two-state solution has long disappeared from the face of the earth, and it was never viable to start with because it was predicated on the fact that the Zionist state should exist and that the Palestinian land should be carved up and given to Zionist, imperialist, colonial settlers. People of goodwill around the world understand there's something fundamentally wrong with the division of Africa. The colonization of Africa was the first time in history, in human history, when the population of an entire continent declined because millions of slaves were slaughtered in the passage to the United States and Latin America. No one recognized the legitimacy of British and French colonialism. When I was a kid, the map of Africa was all, British Kenya, Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, Portuguese Guyana, Portuguese Angola, and so on and so forth. People gave their lives in that fight for freedom, and that fight is still going on. I'd like to thank all the panelists and once again start with a few-minute commentaries in the same order that we began. So let's have some final closing words. If we have some time, we can try to get some of the 100 panelists, people who've registered for our webinar. But let's turn the floor over again to Alice Walker for your final comments, observations, opinions, and go back in the same order. Alice, the floor is yours again. Alice, you're on mute.
No, I'm off mute now. It was really wonderful to hear Lamis. We so rarely hear a Palestinian, which is indicative of just how terrible the situation is, that you can never get to hear a word from the victim, or from the resistor. You only hear our media, which is always, almost always lying. So that is the value of something like today, where we get to hear each other and we get to feel the pain that we are feeling. It's a very difficult and challenging time, and we don't know if we're going to survive it, really. But if we do, we will do it singing, we will do it standing, and we'll do it dancing, because that is who we are. We are people of this earth. And this earth does not enjoy being bombed. It does not enjoy being, mistreated in any way. And that is part of the horror of what is happening in Palestine and in so many other places. This total disregard for what the earth itself wants. It wants its trees back in Palestine, for instance. It wants its grape vineyards back in Palestine. And the people want that land back. And they deserve to have their land back. I don't know what will happen to the people, who will never come back. That longing, that place in the heart where your house is. There's a place in your heart where your place is, where you belong and you know it. And to deprive people, any people, of that is beyond cruel. And, I think that the United States has to change majorly in order for us to make any progress. And that means, among other things, forgetting about having a two-party system, because they are really corrupt and they will never do anything but try to out-yell each other. And we should really be thinking about having a different governing body, and if we have to make it ourselves, So I thank everybody here for being here. I mean, we are what we are and who we are. And it's worth something to still be standing.
Thank you, Alice Walker. A bit of a commercial announcement. This webinar is sponsored by Socialist Action, the national political party. I was its candidate for president of the United States in 2016 and 2020. I lost to Biden and Trump, but I don't I don't regret running for an educational campaign to change the society. You can contact Socialist Action at socialistaction.org. Sign up on our website and contribute, socialistaction.org. And now let's go to Nora Bowers-Friedman from the electronic Intifada. Nora.
Thanks, Jeff. I want to plug my website and our incredible colleagues over at EI. We are working constantly around the clock, literally, to publish incredibly important news analysis, but also personal narratives from our contributors and our colleagues who are in Gaza and in the West Bank, who are surviving. And we always tell them, you tell your friends, please don't take any unnecessary risks. If you want to please do your story, yes, but we always caution, don't go out as in places that aren't safe. Nowhere is safe in Gaza. And a lot of our contributors have been saying well, I might be bombed in my living room, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to make, some reports, and I'll, because there's no internet or hardly any self-service, they're sending their articles by WhatsApp, piecemeal by WhatsApp. Sometimes it takes hours for it to get through. And we are incredibly grateful and incredibly scared for them. And we are, just we're trying to to keep their morale up. We're trying to keep our own morale up. And we are just extraordinarily humbled and honored to do this work. And we've been hearing from people from all over the world that it is making a difference in the way that they are understanding the situation in Palestine. And not just, the corporate mainstream media wants you to believe that the clock began on October 7th, and not the 75 years, the 100 years of colonialism and dispossession and genocide. And so we exist to platform context and history. And so our website is electronicintifada.net. We are doing these regular live streams twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. And you can go over to our YouTube page and sign up to get notified so that you can tune in whenever we stream. And I'm really grateful for all of my colleagues, and to be able to do this work is a real honor.
Thank you, Nora Barrows Friedman from the Electronic Intifada. Let's hear from Joe Lombardo, the National Coordinator of United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC. Joe?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I want to second what Nora said. You got to be reading the Electronic Intifada. It's very important right now, especially. Another website you can go to is the UNAC website, which is unacpeace.org. UNAC is a coalition of anti-war groups, and what we hope to do is bring together as many forces as we can to build a real mass movement, because that's the only power we have. We don't believe we have power through the electoral system. We think we have power only through our own agency, and that's a good place to join up with others and help out to build that kind of movement. The slogan, which is ringing in my ears because I've been chanting it all day today on the protest I was on, from the river to the sea, all of Palestine will be free. When I get challenged on that, I always ask, well, which part of Palestine do you think shouldn't be free? I mean, just turn that around on them. What does that mean? They try to say that's some kind of anti-Jewish sentiment or something, but we need freedom everywhere, certainly, and most acutely right now from the river to the sea. The only other thing I want to say is there's demonstrations happening everywhere, absolutely everywhere. As I said, although I'm in Europe now, I live in upstate New York. And, during every week, there's been 2 or 3. We also have UNAC group lists from different areas of the country. And I'm just noticing in New York, there's 2 or 3 or 4 every day that are going on in New York. You have to get out and you have to join these things. It's not good enough anymore to sit back and let others do it for you, to try to educate yourself, to write a letter and try to get a great formulation for whatever you are. We all have to be activists. We all have to stand with the Palestinians today. So I just want to end by saying, keep it in the streets. That's where our power is.
Thanks, Joe Lombardo and Lamis Deek, Palestinian-American attorney, civil rights, human rights activist, Palestinian freedom fighter. Lamis.
Thank you, Jeff, and everybody. I'm going to touch briefly just on your kindness. UNAC, we have been strong fans and supporters of UNAC, and UNAC has been a backbone for our movement for many years. We've relied on you to mobilize things when it wasn't safe for our own forces to do so. So we so deeply appreciate you having always been on the front lines. Alice, your kindness, and Nora, your own kindness, but also your work on electronic Intifada. You know, I remember when it was considered this, you know, I don't know what the word is in English, words fail me now, but you know, this marginalized outlet, which has proven itself to always be accurate and truthful, and now leading the way in bringing the most accurate and truthful information about Palestine and probably in the region. And so I think it's important that we don't underestimate our power to really take what is called the quote unquote mainstream. And Alice, for your kindness, you know, I said Palestinians are not crying on a daily basis, at least not the ones I know, many of whom are organizers as well. What seems to break us, however, is when we receive kindness. All of that to say that I know that our rage and your solidarity and our capacity and our place in history assures me of our victory, however painful this moment is. I want to build on the point that Alice raised, which is that there is, I think, an anomaly in the sort of racism that Palestinians have endured in the West in modern history. Because it's not just the passing occasional kind of hidden racism, but it is and has been the dominant discourse. I've grown up with colleagues and teachers and neighbors in the US essentially telling me that they wished my people were dead or should be dead. This is considered common discourse. And there is a depth of reflexive racism that I think it's important people really make no space for anywhere anymore on any level, even in the way that we talk about Palestine, not just Palestinians, even as we check our own internal narratives and calls. Of course, I don't mean this for the people here, but for those who will be watching on YouTube later. One prime example of that is Bernie Sanders. Yes, some Palestinians, in my opinion, misguidedly thought he was their Ammo, some warm elderly figure, paternal figure to look up to. We had always known that he was a Zionist. He air quoted human rights when referencing Palestinians in one of his interviews, if you recall. To date, he has not called for a ceasefire. And I believe since October 7th, including after he shared false, defamatory, genocidal propaganda, has refused to say Palestinians. I think so far to date, maybe once or twice, though he's tweeted about it many times. And the Democratic Party is fraught with forces like this. In fact, the Democratic Party statistically, politically, is far more hostile to Palestinians inside Palestine, prosecutes them a ton more, legislates against them a ton more, and gives more funding to the Zionist entity than Republicans do. And this is part of this whole, it doesn't make Palestine the exception of morality, make Palestinians the exception to humanity, and prop up this not just, failed, but truly vicious and barbaric two-party system, which has proven itself as the axis of genocide. And those that they've called the axis of evil have proven themselves to be the axis of justice. I mean, this is the Western line, and we hope to see people out in the streets, but also in every sector of societies, schools, courts, on the docks, in the unions, everywhere. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Lamis. Let me thank our audience. We had in and out over 100 people who joined our webinar, and thousands more will hear it on YouTube. You can check Socialist Action's website at socialistaction.org. We have a dozen articles on Palestine, its history and background. You can donate to Socialist Action through our website. Let me say this. The theme of the New York Times, the US government, the Democratic and Republican Party, that anyone who supports Palestine is an anti-Semite. The accusation of anti-Semitism has been thrown wildly against every supporter of Palestinian rights. Just a year ago, we had the Berkeley Book Fair basically calling Alice Walker an anti-Semite because she criticized the Zionist state of Israel. And we organized a webinar and a petition, and some 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people supported Alice Walker. That was the beginning of changes in this country. Today, to throw the anti-Semite label at people doesn't stick anymore. Not when millions are in the street everywhere in the world. And it took those millions in the street, literally tens of millions of people, 3 million in Yemen, millions in Iran. All of these countries are victims of genocide themselves. The United States organizes, supports the Saudi Arabia genocide against the Yemeni people. And 3 million of them are in the streets supporting the Palestinians because they understand genocide when they see it. And the same thing with the Iranians. The United States organized a coup that overthrew the democratically elected country. The United States committed genocide in Vietnam and killing 4 million Vietnamese for daring to invade the land that they were born in. The United States government supported the Batista, Somoza, Pinochet dictatorship that slaughtered people. The United States has been complicit with this genocide. The fact that millions of people have been in the streets protesting either for Black Lives Matter or against US wars or for Palestinian freedom and democracy and the right to live shows that we are living in changing times. I'd like to thank the over 100 people who have sent comments to our chat box unanimously, praising all of the speakers and expressing their appreciation for their boldness in telling the truth. We have been pressured to not tell the truth about Palestine for fear that we would lose our jobs, for fear that we would be persecuted as anti-Semites. Today, the Zionists, in my opinion, are on the run. They are discredited throughout the world by humanity, who is in the vast majority in every nation on earth, including the United States, opposed to the Zionist genocide. The polls show that a majority of the American people are for a ceasefire. And Bernie Sanders' pathetic statement formally opposing a ceasefire last week is an expose that his connection with the Democratic Party, the racist Democratic Party, the party of the slavocracy in the past, is more important to him than the freedom of the Palestinian people or oppressed people in the rest of the world. So I want to thank all of our panelists again. We promised an hour and 20 minutes, and we're now into an hour and a half. I'd like to thank Joe Lombardo, Alice Walker, Nora Barrows Friedman, Lamis Deek, and I'd like to thank my own party, Socialist Action, for initiating this webinar. There'll be more. To the streets has to be our motto. Mass mobilizations to express the opinion of the majority. Independent political action, in my view. I think Lamis hit it on the head when she said the Democratic Party is the prime supporter of racist Zionism in this country. And the Republicans are fundamentally no different. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for this magnificent webinar. I'm very proud to know and associate with you. We have a lot of work to do ahead, but let's start. No end all aid to apartheid Israel, no US participation in the slaughter and the genocide, boycott, divestment, sanctions, and freedom for the Palestinian people in the framework of a new society, a democratic, secular society with the right to return of Palestinians to live as equals, to have their land back, and to be part, hopefully, of a socialist federation of the Middle East. Thank you all so much for participating. I'm Jeff Mackler, National Secretary of Socialist Action.